Okay, so what I've done is I've broken chapter 2 into two parts. One part is cells and the organelles in cells, and then the other part is macromolecules. So if you took biology, you've spent a lot more time and probably more in depth than what we're going to do. So this is just kind of a review or a short introduction. Okay, so organisms and their components. So making money in biotechnology really depends on the organisms and what they're made out of. Okay, so the organisms could be as small as a cell, which would be like E. coli, which is a type of bacteria, or they could just be a molecule, so that's more a group of atoms put together. Okay, sometimes the manufacturing depends on multicellular organisms, so it could depend on animals, it could depend on plants, insects. Okay, so there's all sorts of things it could depend on. Okay, now in order for all of this to work, people, when they're involved in biotechnology, they need to have an understanding of biochemistry. Okay, so that's the chemistry dealing with life. Cytology, which is the study of cells. Okay, anatomy, which is structure, like what the parts are named and how they work. And then physiology, this is kind of the chemistry of how living things work. So they're like, how does cellular respiration work? How do your lungs work? How does that oxygen get exchanged? That kind of thing. Okay, so one thing that biotechnologists do is they really exploit the diversity of things that are living on Earth. Okay, so that we take it and we look for the most diverse things and what they can do, and then we go from there. Okay, so here's just some pictures. This is kind of silly probably, but organisms and their components. Okay, so we look at, for example, here's fish. Okay, strawberries, tomatoes. Okay, that was one of the first genetically modified organisms. Cows, fish. Well, there's a lot of research in the area on fish. That it goes on in West Virginia. Corn is a genetically modified organism, and this is an agar plate, and on the agar plate there are these little tiny things. These are colonies of bacteria that are growing. Okay, so one of the things that we'll review real fast are what makes something living, so the characteristics of life. Okay, so something has to be able to grow, has to be able to reproduce, okay, it has to respond to a stimulus from the external environment. It has to have metabolism, okay, where it can break down food products, okay, so it breaks them down, so metabolism, if you can read my scribble here. Production of waste products, okay, so makes waste. The smallest unit of life is a cell, okay, and there are single-celled organisms, so they call them unicellular. So they're mainly microscopic. We can't see them with the naked eye. You have to use a microscope. And bacteria are the simplest, and we use a lot of bacteria because they're really fast to grow. So they can reproduce, like E. coli. It will double, okay, in 20 minutes. So it's really fast. It's easy to use. Okay, multicellular animals, they're going to take longer to reproduce, but the situations, the molecules and things that they are going to produce are going to be much more similar to what humans would produce. So their molecules will be easier to put into a body. Okay, so we have two groups of cells, okay, based on their fundamental structure. So eukaryotic cells are cells that, it's kind of, I always say it's like a true nucleus, so karyon. So it's true. So what that means is they have membrane-bound organelles in them, and they have a nucleus. Okay, so that means that their DNA is going to be enclosed in a nucleus, in a membrane-bound structure. It's not floating around in there free. Okay, so eukaryotic cells are higher up the evolutionary scale than prokaryotic cells. Okay, so prokaryotic cells, that's before the nucleus. So these are single-celled organisms. They don't have membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so no membranes, and they don't have a nucleus. So if you look, here's the cell. Okay, and then its nucleus is kind of enclosed like that. It's, or not nucleus, there is no nucleus. The DNA, it's a circular chromosome. So they have one circular chromosome. Okay, and it's not in a membrane-bound organelle, if that makes any sense. So examples of, whoops, let's see if I can move this box down. An example would be, well, that's not going to work. Okay, I was going to try to type it. Example would be E. coli, streptococcus, staphylococcus. There's all sorts of bacteria. Okay, so, but those are bacteria are prokaryotes. Everything else pretty much has membrane-bound organelles, and they're considered eukaryotes. Okay, so prokaryotes are very simple. We're probably some of the first organisms to be found on our planet. Okay, because they're just very straightforward. There's not a lot going on inside it. I mean, there's a lot going on, but there's not a lot of organelles. And then eukaryotes are way more complex. Okay, so if you look, this kind of just reiterates what I already said. So simplest organisms are single-celled. Okay, so here's an example of bacterium that is rod-shaped. So it's got little rods here, and there's just a whole bunch of them. This would be magnified a lot, more than 1,000 times, so maybe like 5,000 times to see something like that. And then complex organisms, so dogs, here's the seaweed. So they contain many different kinds of cells. So there's all sorts of different kinds of cells that exist. Okay, now if we look at the levels of biological organization, we always make a big deal about this because we want you to really understand it's like the hierarchy and how things are organized. And it makes sense if you know what everything is, but if you don't know what it is, it can be confusing. So an atom would be something like carbon, hydrogen. Okay, so an atom is the smallest piece of an element that can still be recognized as the element. Okay, a molecule is something like C6, can't you hear my cat? The cat just jumped up here. H12O6. So this is a molecule of glucose. Okay, so it's got more than one atom involved. There's organelle. This is mitochondria, or mitochondrium. Okay, and then the cell. Okay, and the cell's made up of a variety of organelles. And then tissue. Tissue is a group of cells, and the cells are all going to work together for a particular purpose. Okay, so these are, if you take anatomy or cell biology, you'll learn about the shapes of the cells and how you name them. Okay, and then from tissues, we build organs. Okay, so there's your stomach. Okay, so an organ is a group of tissues that work together. Okay, and then organ systems. So here's your GI tract and your digestive system. Okay, and then we put the organ systems together and we get an organism. Okay, now, there's different levels of organization, so we just kind of went over those. So they usually we organize them by function. So we have different tissues. Okay, so there might be nervous tissue. There's epithelial tissue. Okay, epithelial tissue lines openings. Okay, and then organs are made up of the different types of tissue. Okay, so if you look here, here's, if we just cut through your skin, okay, the skin is epithelial tissue. Okay, and then there's fat, which would be adipose tissue. And then there's muscle, which is another type of tissue. So there's 3 types of tissue all together. And that would kind of serve as like maybe your organ, which would be the skin. Well, that's not an organ, but that's an example of how the tissues can work together. So the heart would have different kinds of tissue. So it's going to have fat, it's going to have nervous tissue, it's going to have muscle, it's going to have all sorts of different things in there. Okay, so what happens is all the cells and tissues are going to work together to perform a function. Okay, now, why do we care about cells? Okay, so in biotechnology, what we're going to do is we're going to look at different cells and we're going to exploit them to make products. Okay, so if we can, and we want to sell something, we're going to manipulate living organisms to produce large amounts of a particular product. Okay, so maybe we need to make measles vaccine because people are realizing that they haven't got their kids vaccinated, and it's actually going to be a problem. So if we need to make a whole bunch of it right now, we'd have to make it wouldn't be like making a small amount. We would need to grow a lot of cells to make a lot of product. Okay, so this says, depending on the type of cell, hundreds of different molecules are being manufactured at any given moment. Okay, so in your cells, they can make about 2,000 different proteins at any one time. Okay, so every cell's got the genetic makeup to do that, but not every cell is going to make every protein all the time. Okay, so some are unique to a particular cell. So we'll talk about that more as time goes on. Okay, so organelles are membrane-bound structures. They're not considered alive. They can't live by themselves. Okay, so they have to be part of the cell in order to live. They have specialized compartments, okay, and specialized functions. They're made up of carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. So what they're going to do is they're going to make the cell do what it needs to do.